Hi, my name is Stephen McGee, and I'm the author of Health Forensics and Hypoxia, Mental Illness, and Chronic Fatigue. And we're here to talk about toxic altitude, and that's me on the cover of the book, and I'm at the top of Mauna Kea on a sunny day, and that's the world's largest telescopes called the W.M. Keck Observatory. And I'm also over here on top of the world's largest telescopes. So I'm actually standing up here in this picture. And that is the Subaru telescope. So you can see the day is cloudy on that picture. So we're going to talk about a subject of toxic altitude, and that is industrial gas exposures, and we're on page 23 of Toxic Altitude. So let's see what we can find out in this chapter about industrial gas. Professional Astronomy was releasing the following gases into the indoor environment: nitrogen, helium, carbon dioxide. The problem with this is it creates oxygen-deficient environments. They start out as liquid cryogenics that are some of the coldest substances known to man. As they are released into the indoor environment and warm up, they vaporize into gas. 1 liter of liquid cryogenic can turn into thousands of liters of gas. Liquid cryogenics can cause severe frost burns if it gets onto the skin or the eyes. The following are health issues that are known to occur in oxygen-deficient environments. 21% to 18%, no discernible symptoms. Everything below is classified as a hazardous situation. 18% to 11%. Physical and intellectual performance degrades. Vertigo, headache, speech difficulties. 11 to 8%. Risk of fainting without warning, risk of death. 8 to 6%. Fainting occurs after a short time. Immediate resuscitation required. 6% to 0%. Immediate fainting. Immediate resuscitation required. Brain damage occurs. Rescuers may be incapacitated, often fatal. The problem with releasing industrial gas into the indoor environment is that it increases the levels of hypoxia. This effectively raises the altitude that the person is at. Industrial gas that is released indoors at 13,800 feet at the summit of Mauna Kea may take the person to a much higher effective altitude. This effective altitude will be further increased if the person has developed lazy lungs from regularly breathing medical oxygen. So one of the things that they're doing up on top of Mauna Kea is they're breathing medical oxygen to stay up there. So it happens a few times a day, typically, in most people. They take medical oxygen for about 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and most staff seem to do it from what I've seen. And you quite often have to queue for your turn on the medical oxygen because there's not enough cylinders, and there tends to be several people in the queue for each cylinder, particularly in the afternoons. So they're all breathing medical oxygen, and they're all breathing these industrial gases. Well, certainly all the people that work with industrial gases, and I think it's fair to say that everybody is breathing medical oxygen, which is an industrial gas. And it switches from being an industrial gas to medical gas when it's highly filtered and it's made for human consumption. So The rooms where these oxygen cylinders are in are actually filled with medical oxygen, because the medical oxygen is being released into these rooms where the cylinders are. And it's the same with these cylinders of nitrogen, helium, and carbon dioxide, where these are being released. The rooms and areas are filling up with the gas. So that's what we're talking about in this chapter. So let's carry on. Any cold gas or heavier than air gas will go into low spaces such as culverts, trenches, machine pits, basements, and elevator shafts, called lifts in the UK. Lighter than air gases, helium, will rise and collect in high points, behind false ceilings, under a roof. Oxygen monitoring alarms are generally required in areas where oxygen enrichment or depletion may occur. I have no recollection of seeing an oxygen monitoring alarm system during my time in professional astronomy. Now, I worked in professional astronomy for a decade, so I worked at 3 different sites in La Palma in the Canary Islands, Kitt Peak in Arizona, and here in Hawaii at the summit of Mauna Kea on Hawaii Island. So I never saw an oxygen monitoring alarm system during my time in these facilities, so I found that quite strange, given that there's a lot of industrial gas being released into the human environment. We never wore personal environmental oxygen monitors. Regarding altitude environments, oxygen enrichment or depletion may occur much faster than at sea level. So what's going on up here is there's far less air. So we're in a low pressure air environment. So when you release gas into a low pressure air environment, it accumulates at a much greater rate than down at sea level. So the risks of playing around with industrial and medical gases up here are quite different to those at sea level, and it seems to be a much riskier activity on these high altitude mountains. Lone working during discharging nitrogen, helium, and carbon dioxide gas was prevalent in professional astronomy and is undesirable. So there's been lots of times where I've been alone releasing this gas, and if I'd fainted, nobody would have realized, and the gas would have continued to be released into the area that I was fainted in. So I'm very, very fortunate I never fainted when I was releasing these industrial gases into the indoor environment in astronomy. There's been many people killed by these industrial gases. They faint, the gas keeps on releasing and eventually kills them. So a lot of people are being found dead around industrial gas cylinders. I would feel drunk at times during and after discharging the gas into the indoor environment. The intoxication effect would last for hours. So this was interesting. I particularly noticed it in the first observatory I worked in La Palma. And I would feel drunk while I was working with this, and afterwards it would last for a few hours afterwards. And what I didn't know at the time, because I hadn't been trained to know it, was that it's one of the first symptoms of industrial gas poisoning. So you start to feel drunk. It's euphoric. You feel euphoric. So yeah, some people who abuse industrial gases, they do it for the euphoria. So that's what they're up to when they're breathing these industrial gases. And I know it's kind of popular in the kids to breathe industrial gases to get that euphoric effect. So I would experience that in my job. There is a high risk of fainting during discharging industrial gas indoors, and it can happen without warning. Some of the locations we would discharge the gas into were remote, and it is unlikely you would be found until the end of the workday when you had been noticed missing. It was common at some observatories for young college and university students to discharge industrial cryogenic liquids and gas into the indoor environment at the office and at altitude. I've witnessed and heard of some really shady things with these students over the years that violate established health and safety standards regarding discharged liquid cryogenics and gas into the indoor environment. I personally witnessed one student faint that I knew was working with liquid cryogenics and was inadvertently breathing the released gas. So it's something to be aware of is if you're messing around with these things, you've been inhaling the gas, it may actually be damaging your body and your brain. You know, it may actually be doing all kinds of weird organ damage. So you need to be very, very careful with anything that you breathe that is known for its toxicity, as industrial gases are, and they're known to kill people. And if you breathe it, you may still be experiencing the effects for hours, days, months later. If you got permanent damage from it, you could be experiencing the effects for the rest of your life. So yeah, it's kind of strange that professional astronomy has these really young students working with it. And I think the most gross violations I am aware of are with these students. So they're kept dumb. They're not sent on training courses. I've never been on a training course for this stuff. I was trained by the people I worked with, and it was clear to me on reflection that that training was grossly inadequate, because had I knew how toxic these gases are, I would have refused to work with them. So that is something that happens in professional astronomy, is they keep the workers dumb as to how toxic these gases are. And one of the ways that they do that is not to inform them how toxic they are. So it's kind of lying through silence. This is what's going on in professional astronomy. So I actually went through professional astronomy for a decade, not realizing how toxic these gases were. And had I known how toxic these gases were, I may have had a very different career. I certainly would not have worked in professional astronomy. So I often wonder about these students, how it affected them, and particularly in the long term, because yeah, you don't really want to be young in the prime of your life and breathing industrial gases. It's just, it's a road to despair if it damages you in any way. So I find that very concerning that these young people in astronomy are being exposed to these industrial gases. They are very, very toxic. Okay, regarding finding an unconscious worker in an area that may have industrial gas in it, number one, do not try to rescue them. Number two, remove yourself from the area. Number three, place a 911 call for an ambulance and fire rescue. Number four, alert the facility workers to start an organized rescue. Number five, if it is an oxygen leak, the area may be explosive or highly flammable. Now, this telescope's been on fire. This is the Subaru telescope. Killed a bunch of people and sent a much larger bunch of people to the hospital. So that's what that telescope is famous for in professional astronomy. It's famous for deaths, that telescope. So had a big fire in it. And I'm not sure how the fire got started, but once it got started, it became very serious very quickly. So this is a problem with oxygen in facilities. Oxygen is in use, and as far as I'm aware, it's in use in all facilities on top of Mauna Kea. And if you have an oxygen leak, it can actually cause the facility to go on fire or even explode. It can be explosive, and it can do the same with your clothes. If it gets into your clothes, you become this huge fire risk. You can go on fire. So it's something that was not communicated to the workers when I worked with it and breathed it, is that it could get into my clothes and set me on fire. I only found out about that years later, and that's kind of what we're talking about, is kind of the lying through silence that's going on in professional astronomy, is that they're not training people on these gases correctly. And these people really should be going on industrial gas and liquid cryogenic training courses, but they're not. I've never met anybody who's been on one. So it's kind of important for professional astronomy to keep people in the dark so that they will work with it, because it seems to be in use in all of these facilities. So number 6, ventilate the area with fresh outdoor air. So number 7, start environmental oxygen monitoring. So I'm not sure whether they have any environmental oxygen monitors at these facilities, because I've never seen one. So you may have a very hard job starting environmental oxygen monitoring if there's no environmental oxygen monitor at the facility. So I've never been in a facility where I've seen one of these oxygen monitors. So you may not be able to do number 7 in professional astronomy. 8, rescuers should be wearing self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA. Well, when I worked at the Keck Observatory, they have this SCBA equipment, and it's basically like a scuba tank that you can wear. I'm not sure they had the full extent of the equipment needed to deal with rescues, but they certainly had an SCBA unit. I remember seeing it there. And it's important to realize that if you're going into an area where there's industrial gas, that you may pass out and become another victim if you're not wearing one of these SCBA units. So it just feeds you fresh air from a cylinder. It enables you to go into a toxic air environment and breathe fresh air. So that's what that's about, number 8. So number 9, resuscitation using medical oxygen should be done at the earliest opportunity. Well, there's certainly no shortage of oxygen up here, but there's a shortage of oxygen cylinders. So queuing up for oxygen was always an issue at this WM Keck Observatory. There was never enough cylinders to deal with the amount of staff that were developing what they call summit brain. So these workers on top of Mauna Kea, they all appear to develop a condition that the management calls summit brain. So they develop brain functioning issues. And they're doing that because they're going hypoxic, and they're not acclimatized properly to the mountain. And it brings on the summit brain, and they treat it with medical oxygen. So that's why there's medical oxygen on the mountain. So the workers are just routinely using it on a daily basis. And they know this is not emergency use of medical oxygen, it's routine use of medical oxygen. So they don't have prescriptions. It's a medical oxygen is a prescription drug in the USA, RX only, they call it over here. So you're supposed to have a doctor's prescription. I can tell you I never had a doctor's prescription for oxygen atop Mauna Kea. I just used to walk over to the cylinder and help myself to it. So, number 10, send the victim to hospital for recovery and monitoring, or for recording of death. So it's important, particularly up at these high altitude facilities, that the people get off to hospital as soon as possible, because they need to descend as part of the treatment. So they're in oxygen starvation up here on top of the mountain because of the altitude. They're at very high altitude, and you need to get them down to sea level for recovery as soon as possible. And the hospital's typically about maybe an hour away if you're lucky. If it's an ambulance with the flashing lights and it's going as fast as it can, it may get you to hospital after about an hour. Number 11, notify the management team of the accident. So I believe that's OSHA law. I think you have to notify and record the accident. Number 12, file an OSHA report of workplace injury or death. So you actually have to contact OSHA and file a report with OSHA. So for those of you who don't know what OSHA is, it's Occupational Safety and Health, and that's the name, abbreviation in America. So it's the American Health and Safety Agency, OSHA. Many people have been killed by releasing industrial gas into the environment. Far more people have had near misses with it. So I'm in the near miss category, so I've had plenty of near misses with it. There appears to be little information about the long-term health issues that may appear in people that have breathed industrial gas in their jobs. So that brings us into this book. Hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. If you've been breathing industrial gas, medical oxygen, up at very high altitudes on top of Mauna Kea, you may well develop this condition, because I developed that condition. I developed hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. I have lung damage. I was going to the mental health people for years, and I was chronically fatigued. It's all classic symptoms of hypoxic damage to the body. And that was the conclusion I came to in this book, is that my body has hypoxic damage that causes mental illness and chronic fatigue. So it is probably similar to the health effects related to smoking, and hypoxic damage is the expected outcome. I have only witnessed one person faint at high altitude during my time in professional astronomy, and it was here at the Keck Observatory. He was part of a tour group that was visiting the summit of Mauna Kea. He fainted in the instrument area of the telescope where the industrial gases were being discharged into the indoor environment. The summit staff gave him oxygen and sent him down to sea level afterwards. I am not aware if he was instructed to go to the hospital emergency room for evaluation as to why he fainted. I never saw him again. So this guy was on a tour I was giving, and there were several people in the tour, and right before he fainted, he stepped out from the group and said he wasn't feeling well. And that was pretty much the last thing he said before the eyes rolled back into his head and his legs collapsed and he fell. He was fortunate that he got some words out saying he wasn't feeling well, because it alerted the group to catch him. So he was caught before he hit the ground. He was lucky he was caught, because had he hit the ground, he would have hit a metal grating. So he could have been injured by hitting the ground. And that's what happens to a lot of people with these industrial gases, is they just unexpectedly faint without warning. And if they're alone, they can die, particularly if they've hit their head on the way down and they've got some kind of brain damage, a brain bleed. You don't want a brain bleed on top of Mauna Kea. You're up at very high altitude at almost 13,800 feet. I believe 40% of the oxygen maybe is missing out of the environment up there. So you're very oxygen deficient on top of Mauna Kea. And that's why they're using oxygen, intermittent oxygen up there, is to try and stave off some of the effects. But it doesn't work very well. You end up with all kinds of long-term health issues from it. So, yeah, that guy fainted. He did the classic thing around industrial gas-polluted areas. He fainted. So, came as quite a shock to me when I saw that happen. I've only seen one person directly in front of me faint in professional astronomy. It was this guy on the tour. And yeah, it certainly made for an interesting tour, that was for sure. So I never saw it again, thankfully. As I say, I have no idea how he went on, so that's a mystery to me. There was never any follow-up by the WM Keck Observatory that I'm aware of on this guy that fainted on a WM Keck Observatory tour. Inhalation of helium can lead to unconsciousness, cessation of breathing, and sudden death. Okay, well, I've done that. I didn't know that when I did it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. So let's go over that again. So, inhalation of helium can lead to unconsciousness, cessation of breathing, and sudden death. So there's actually a lot of people being killed by helium, and there's a lot of people that have been maimed by it. So you hear of it a lot in kids that inhale helium from helium balloons. It kind of happens in them. They don't realize that helium is super toxic to the human. And, you know, you've got to kind of wonder about these helium balloons that are being sold to kids. So it's kind of one of those, a little bit of a sick-minded activity is selling helium balloons to kids, because the gas inside the balloon is super toxic. And if they breathe it, it can kill them, or it can maim them for life. And I don't think most kids know this. So if you're a kid and you're watching this video, I'm just letting you know that you need to be very careful with helium because it's not good for you. And I don't want you to go unconscious. I don't want you to stop breathing. And I don't want you to have a sudden death because your mum and dad are not going to be happy about that. So please don't breathe. Please don't breathe the gas in helium balloons. So we used to breathe the gas. And I do wonder about the long-term effects of that. I went on and developed this hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue, and I was most certainly breathing helium gas. Most people are aware that inhaling helium makes you talk with a high-pitched voice. I have inhaled helium at very high altitude to experience this. I did it at the Keck Observatory. So that was interesting. I would never have done it had I been trained correctly and knew that it could kill me. What I did not know at the time was that I was risking my life by doing so. Lack of industry-approved training courses in the hazards of industrial gases and liquid cryogenics was prevalent in professional astronomy. I was never sent on an industry-approved cryogenic liquids and industrial gases training course by any of my professional astronomy employers, despite working daily with them. So I actually queried this with my first employer in La Palma in the Canary Islands. And they told me that the liquid cryogenics I was working with were just liquid air. So the liquid cryogenics I was working with there was nitrogen. So when I queried this with the management team, and they're releasing it every day, all day long into the indoor environment at the observatory. It gets released all over the observatory complex. It's in all the detector systems that they use. It's used to keep them cold, and they need to be constantly refilled because it evaporates into the indoor environment. When I queried it with them, they told me it was just liquid air and was harmless. And I can tell you today that's one of the biggest lies I'm aware I've ever been told in the workplace. Because they use it to kill people in America. They use it to kill prisoners. It's so toxic. They use it to kill prisoners that have been condemned to death in the USA. That's how toxic the gas is. It's used to execute people. And I was told that same gas was just liquid air and was harmless. So, great lie from professional astronomy right there. So let's wrap this up. I routinely observed health symptoms in high-altitude staff that matched oxygen enrichment and oxygen depletion while working in professional astronomy. So anyone who's worked in professional astronomy, and particularly worked across multiple facilities in professional astronomy, as I have, will have observed this. There's some strange personalities in professional astronomy, and they're in abundance. So some facilities are more toxic than others, and a lot of this can kind of depend on the size of the facility. You're better off releasing industrial gas into a large facility than a very small facility, and you'll get these oxygen enrichment, oxygen depletion, and industrial gas enrichment and industrial gas depletion effects much faster in small rooms rather than large rooms. So there's definitely some weird stuff going on in professional astronomy. And based on what I know about what they were doing with the releasing of the gases, I'm quite sure some of this is coming out of the gases they're releasing, because the gases are toxic and the staff are not aware of it and they're breathing it willingly. It's one of the meanest things I've ever come across in the workplace, and that is going on top of Mauna Kea, it's going on in La Palma, it's going on in Kitt Peak, and as far as I'm aware, it's going on in every professional astronomy facility in the world. I don't think it's any different. So just be aware of that professional astronomy is engaging in some quite dangerous activities that may be damaging the health of the workers and sending them into hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue long term. So that is toxic altitude. If you want to find out more information, Health Forensics is an interesting read. I wrote it before I started linking a lot of my health issues to the toxicity of altitude, and realizing that the toxicity of altitude leads to hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. Please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and I wish you the very best of health. Thank you.